Kia ora, Kimberly.
Hi, Nikki. How are you?
Well, I'm good, and hello to everybody out there who's joined in for the webinar today. And
Welcome.
yeah, we thought we'd talk a little bit about the very beginning of divorce and separation. Um, and I think, Kimberly, that you've been in that sort of should I stay or should I go space before yourself. So if we're just going to launch right in there, I was going to ask you, what are some of the red flags that indicate that maybe this relationship is coming to an end? So for anybody out there who's sort of thinking, oh, heck, it's a big decision. I'm feeling pretty strongly that things are not working, but what are some of the real red flags out there?
Mm, I work with clients in this phase quite a lot and for quite a long time because they start to see the red flags without recognizing them, but they have that gut feeling that something isn't quite right. So they often reach out for support and trying to untangle and figure out what their thought processes are. And the red flags are anything from just feeling unsupported in the relationship. The communication, hasn't been great or isn't great or is getting worse. A partner that may be a bit distant and not engaging as much in the relationship anymore. Um, Sometimes it's, when you've had a baby and got a young family and one person in the relationship potentially doesn't cope with the lifestyle change as well. So they're kind of checked out a little bit of that family environment and just that support in bringing up children. So those are the most common red flags that I see with clients. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So if you had a client present to you with, hey, look, I'm seeing some or even all of these red flags, but I don't just want to give up. How can I go about it so I don't sort of leave any stone unturned?
Yeah, and that's a great question because that's one of my passions with people in relationships that are looking at whether they stay or go. It's like, what have you done to try and communicate to your partner how you're feeling? Not necessarily that you're not happy, but what you're noticing and what you're feeling yourself. And a lot of it is not blaming the other person, but just having some constructive conversations around what's going on for you. This is how I feel. And then if that doesn't go so well, it is about going and seeing a couples therapist, right? And just seeing if there needs to be a few things that need to be fine-tuned or tweaked with the relationship. And I always say to clients, it's like when you've got a car, you have to service it and it has to have a warrant of fitness every year to keep it on the road. And it's a bit like a relationship. You can't just take each other for granted. And so what work do you want to both put into that relationship to keep it running, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, well, so let's say we've got a client and they've taken on board that they need to go back and try some of these things, see if they can rekindle the flame, increase their communication skills, all of those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, they've given it their best shot. And here we are feeling like, okay, I have actually made the decision and this relationship's at an end.
Mm.
What would you say the first steps are if someone is considering separation or divorce in that they've decided, but maybe they haven't broken the news yet? What are some of the things that they need to do first?
Hmm. There's two ways of looking at it. It depends on the relationship, right? And how safe you feel physically and emotionally in that relationship. And if you don't feel safe, then the first step is to go and seek some outside support for yourself and let others around you know how you're feeling so that they understand what is currently going on in your world. And that outside support can be counseling, it could be getting some advice from a lawyer, it could be just, going to somewhere like Shine or Women's Refuge, or there's different men's groups as well that can, give you that kind of support so that you feel safe before you make any moves towards ending the relationship. If you've got a, relatively okay communication style between the two of you and you feel comfortable and safe enough to talk to your partner, then I think it is important to let them know that you are unhappy. Blindsiding somebody, it generally doesn't go so well. So before you just pack your bags and leave, it's a really good idea to sit down and say, this is how I'm feeling. These are what I need if we're going to make this work, and see what kind of dialogue you can have with your partner around what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So what are the legal requirements for divorce in New Zealand? Someone's decided that that's it for them, they're out. What are the criteria?
Well, in New Zealand, we're a bit different to, the rest of the world in the sense that we can't just get a divorce tomorrow. So we have a 2-year stand down period from when we separate to when we can apply to the courts and get a dissolution of the marriage. So there's a 2-year period to wait, but it does not mean you stay together in that relationship for 2 years. It just means that there is that timeline. But in that timeline, you can still be working through a settlement agreement and, selling assets and splitting assets and working through all those things. You don't need to wait till the end of the 2 years before you can do all that.
Yeah, yeah, sure thing. Okay. Well, see, here we are. We've had our journey from considering separation to deciding that, yep, unfortunately, that's the end of this significant relationship. Had a bit of a think about how this process, you want it to look for yourself and the outcomes for your family. And now it's time to actually have that really difficult conversation with your spouse or your partner about the fact that actually this is the end of the road for me. So, what would you say to people who are sitting there and just that feeling of dread of having this really difficult conversation, a really sad conversation sometimes too for people? So, what would you sort of say to a client in that sort of space who's just wondering how to break this really tough news?
And look, it sometimes is a good idea to sit down with a divorce coach or a therapist and script that conversation so that you get that clarity around what you want to say and how you deliver that, because how that conversation progresses, it determines how the settlement and the divorce process progresses, right? So if you want an amicable separation and divorce, then it is about sitting down and being really kind of considerate of that other person's feelings. And so I often say to clients, it's a good idea to acknowledge what good parts of the relationship there has been over the years and what you have enjoyed about, the time you've been together, and then lead into the reasons why you feel the way you feel and why you're making this decision that you're making. But be really open to hearing your partner's side of things as well, because sometimes we can, perceive things to be something that they're not. And once we open that dialogue and start having these conversations with our partner, we might see it from a whole different perspective once we kind of heard their side of the story as well. So I'm always a believer in never say never. There's always a chance that maybe you can turn things around with the right style of communication and how you approach things. But if you both do decide, or you still are quite resolute in your decision that the relationship is over, keep those lines of communication open and communicate with where you're at, what you want to do, how you're going to move forward with your partner with the separation, because if you can continue to communicate throughout this process, it makes for a far more amicable process in the long run.
Sure, sure. So maybe even scripting that conversation, knowing what it is you're going to say, because when we're having these tough conversations, sometimes everything just goes straight out the window, right? So
Yeah.
having that, maybe even having a think about, well, where's that conversation going to take place? And if you've got children, where are they going to be? You did maybe want to have that space and time to just sit together.
Yes.
So yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
really good idea to make sure that the children aren't around when you're having these initial conversations, because you don't want to have them overhear something that they shouldn't be hearing. And if
mm,
it does get a little bit contentious, then they don't need to be involved in that part of it. So it's a very good idea to, either take it outside of the house or have somebody take the children outside of the house so you can have some quiet time to have that private conversation.
yeah, because of course you might be resolute and you might have come to this decision and done a whole lot of sort of reflection and self work to get there, but your partner, it might be a bit of a surprise to them, right? So
Mm,
we've got there that they need to catch up on that emotional level, and if it's come as a shock, yeah, sometimes it can be a bit more of a conflicted conversation because they're dealing with those really big emotions. So yeah, yeah, that's some of the most important work we do as
mm,
divorce coaches, I suppose, is helping people have those conversations. And then, of course, there's the conversation with the children as well. So once you and your partner have decided, yeah, okay, we're going to move forward with this separation, and now the children need to know, what are some tips around that conversation that you could put out there?
mm. And with the children, it does depend on their age, right? And their understanding of things. So when they're very young, obviously they don't need to know much at all apart from what does this mean for them in regards to their living environment and when they're going to see mum and dad. And then as the children progress with their age, you can divulge a little bit more into it. But generally, it is more so about saying to them, look, you probably have noticed most children do pick up on it, and they're the ones that usually say, well, I've seen this happening for a very long time, and so they understand. But it is always good to sit down together with them. I always say to parents, it's better to come from both of you, not just one. So again, it's scripting that conversation with your divorce coach or together with your partner of who's going to say what, because it shouldn't be led by just one party. And saying to the children, we've come to this decision mutually. It doesn't matter who made that call and who made that decision. Obviously, there's always going to be one person that's pushed for the separation more than the other. The children do not need to know that. All they need to know is that you're both on the same page with what their needs are and what their future is going to look like in regards to who they're going to live with and what house and all those little things that the kids will be concerned about initially.
Yeah. And again, where's that conversation going to be? What's a good time for your family where everyone's all together? Maybe you've had a nice dinner and you're sitting down after dinner in the family room, that kind of thing. And just allowing the kids to ask those questions, but maybe even having some individual time with each of the kids after that conversation's taken place, just to give them cuddles, see if they've got any questions that they didn't want to ask in front of the other parent or in
Mm.
front of siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often do say it's quite good to, if you've got more than one child, maybe for each of you to take one or two children and go for a little walk after that conversation separately from the other parent because they tend to open up with just one parent more than both together. It can be quite intimidating for them, and they do have questions, but they often need to go away and process what you've just told them and then come back. So always give them the opportunity to come back and say, Mum, Dad, I've got a few questions. Is it okay that I ask? And so just letting them know that you're always going to be there to be a listening ear and answer any questions that you can. And
Yeah.
obviously, if there has been, an affair or infidelity or whatever, the children do not need to know any of those things. And
No,
and that
kids
that
kids wanna know, where am I still gonna have my play dates? Do I still get to go play football or do my ballet? That's the kind of thing that kids wanna know,
mm,
isn't it? That's
yeah.
just the more practical stuff,
Yes,
so,
exactly.
yeah.
Like, where are we going to live? And is that still going to be close to school and my friends and all those things? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to remind our participants if you've got any questions of your own, please type them into the chat and we can answer them as we
Yeah, and
go.
I have actually had a question come in, which is,
Right.
do both parents have to agree to 50-50 shared care?
That's a really good question. And look, you don't have to agree to 50-50. It can be what works for your family. Every family is unique and every environment is different. So it comes down to what's going to work best for the children. It's not necessarily about what's best for the parents. And I know a lot of parents make those decisions on, what works for them around their lifestyle and their work environment, but actually what do your children need and what is best for them? And as an example for myself, I've co-parented for 14 years. And initially, I did have more of the custody because I had more of the flexibility. And then we went through a period of it being 50-50. And then now my child is a teenager and she gets to make a decision. So it has to be a little bit led by what's best for the children. And as they get older, giving them a voice and a choice as well.
Yeah, so ages and stages, if you've got a 4-year-old, well, maybe it's too much to go for a week without seeing the other parent. So I might do 2, 2, 3 kind of split, but yeah, just whatever works for this family, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Nikki. It is about not just it being week on, week off. 50-50 doesn't have to be week on, week off. And when you've got really young children, they find that that's a long time to be away from one parent. And so splitting that week up in half, or as you said, 2, 2, 3, and that model is generally quite common with preschoolers and young primary school age children. And the 2, 2, 3 model, for those that have never heard of that, is 2 nights during the week with one parent, the other 2 nights of the week with the second parent, and then we alternate Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So one weekend I'd be with mum, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and the next weekend with the other parent, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, so that you each get a weekend on and off, and the weekdays aren't so long for the children.
Yeah. And then we've got teenagers at the other end, right, who
Mm,
do not want to pack all their hair straighteners and moisturizers and all sorts of stuff up every 2 days. So
yeah.
they might be week on, week off. They might
Mm,
be 2 weeks on, week off. It really just depends
mm,
on your
mm.
family and your kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It is about what works for the teams when they get to that age, because they're usually quite busy with their own lives as well. So that sometimes they just choose the parents' house that's closer to all their activities,
Yeah.
But obviously, they do need to and should be seeing both parents where possible. So that, yeah, whatever works for them at that age, I think is
Yeah.
ideal.
And I just want to acknowledge there how difficult that can be,
Mm,
particularly if there's been one parent who's been the primary caregiver, stay-at-home parent maybe, and then to see that, well, actually, now that we've separated, I don't get to keep the kids 100% of the time, or even just one night here or there. We actually have to now come up with a different way of being, and that can be extremely difficult.
mm, that's so true. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
look, if it does get difficult, then there are um, mediation processes, FDR mediation that's funded by our government. So private mediators that can help with your parenting situation and what that plan looks like. And during that mediation process, the children can also have the opportunity to speak to a mediator or the counsellor appointed by the mediator, so that they do get a voice in that process as well. So if you do find it quite challenging to put a parenting plan in place, which often that is where the challenges come post-divorce, is the co-parenting, then please remember that there are things out there to help support you, and people that we can bring in to help you get that parenting
yeah.
plan and under
And
control.
obviously the DSCI-NZ website's still under construction. We're getting there, but we will have that page, which is where people can go just to get links to some of those Ministry of Justice website pages, some very basic parenting plans. And we do like to suggest a little more detail than what's in those plans just to avoid future conflict, but they're a good starting point. And some other links such as parenting through separation courses, how to find the mediators, that kind of stuff. So we'll load all that up as we go. We're getting there,
Mm,
aren't we?
yeah, and look,
Um,
it's not there yet, but if you need it sooner rather than later, then please feel free to email us through the website, and we can definitely send those to you personally.
yeah, absolutely. So actually, just on this topic, we've sort of got another question here that says, what things make bird nesting work well? And you might need to explain
Mm.
briefly what that means, bird
Mm,
nesting.
yeah, true. Bird nesting is when you're newly separating and you're not quite ready to sell the family home or move the children out of the family home. And so what that looks like is that the one parent stays with the children in the family home, and it can be for that 2-2-3 model or the week on, week off, whatever works for your family, and then the other parent will go and stay somewhere else. And the somewhere else can be a rented apartment, going and staying with friends or parents. Everyone's different with what their affordability is in regards to that. But I do have quite a lot of clients that do start off that separation process just to let the kids have time to adjust, or it's about letting the parents have time to adjust, right? Is this really what we want? So it's like a little trial period of separating, co-parenting, doing it on your own as a single parent in the home with the children, to see how you will survive and whether you thrive or not. So a good starting point, I think, for that early phases of separation, but also, when you're still trying to work out what you're going to do with the family home, if it's going to be sold or if one partner's going to buy the other out. So it just gives you that time to slow things down and just work through things at a pace that works for everybody, including the children.
Yeah. So that's a positive, obviously, gives everybody a bit of time to adjust, can be really helpful when there are family pets, for example,
Mm.
involved that can stay in the home. So are there any other things that make that style of co-parenting work really well?
There's two things that two ways of looking at bird nesting, and I always say to clients, if you're going to do this, put some rules and boundaries in place, because it can work really well in the sense that the children aren't being shuffled around two homes to start with, so they're still in their own beds in their own home, and mum and dad, or dad and dad and mum are all moving in and out, and so that's nice for them to just slowly adjust to this new family life. But without those rules and boundaries, there can be a few things that might come up as time goes by. And so, what does it look like if one of the parents does repartner or meet somebody new? Would they be coming into the nest with their new partner, or is that for their own personal time when they're outside of the family unit? So looking at the pros and cons is definitely a good idea when it comes to bird nesting, and just having a conversation around what we need to put in place to make sure that there's no conflict and that the children are comfortable and we're both following the rules, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've just had another question through here, Kimberly. How would you help a person who is blindsided by their partner telling them they want to separate to navigate the early phase of negotiating co-parenting without letting their emotional responses drive their decision making?
It's a big question, but a good question, and it's quite common, isn't it, that the one party doesn't expect to be going through a separation or divorce, so they do feel blindsided, and then of course emotions get very heightened because you weren't prepared and all ready for such things. And in that instance, I often say to my clients, slow the process down. Yes, one person might have made that decision and they want out, but they need to respect that you need time to catch up, and that takes time to come to terms with. We know the new dynamic of what life is going to be like, so just slow it down and seek expert advice. Talk to a divorce coach, a lawyer, a counselor. Work through the emotions that you're dealing with, because if you can't manage your own emotions, you're not going to work through the next stages of negotiating, a settlement agreement or co-parenting agreement or anything else. So doing a little bit of work on yourself to make sure that you're feeling stronger, more resilient, and a little bit less emotional, so that you're making choices and agreements that are sensible and have been kind of reality checked before you kind of get into the thick of it.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, for the parent who's found out that the separation is going ahead, there's a lot of big stuff in there, right? Hey, I didn't choose this. Why should I have to move out of the family home? Or why should I have to adjust my spending? Any of those kind of feelings of, well, hang on a minute, you did this. And for the other person, the challenge there is this new relationship, maybe that's on the cards, moving forward towards that and sort of forgetting that actually behind me are these other people who haven't quite caught up with where I'm at. And that's where we're saying slow the process down. Let's see if we can actually not make any of those big decisions until we've had a bit more time to process. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, just slow it down and try and talk to each other about, where you're at and at what pace you need to work at, because obviously, as I say, one person's breathes ahead of the other, and it's just slowing yourself down to give that other person time to catch up, and be respectful of their feelings and their emotions, and let them work through those things so that they are in a better position to mentally deal with what's to come.
Yeah. Okay. So I have got another question here, which is what can you do if your teenager wants to live full time with the other parent?
Mm, it's challenging. And it's hard for the parent that the teenager doesn't want to live with, so to speak. But from the age of 16, they do get a voice and they do get a choice. And I always say they, even at a younger age, should have a voice and should be able to be heard about where they want to be in regards to co-parenting households. But after 16, there isn't a lot you can do but support them in their decision. And if you push back, you tend to lose them. So you're better to kind of be a bit more fluid and flexible with that, but also just stay in contact, constantly be in communication with them if you're the parent that they've chosen to not live with, because eventually they will probably come back. They realize that sometimes living with one parent is a little bit intense and a little bit too much, and they start to recognize that maybe living a little bit between two homes isn't so bad after all. You know, teenagers can be their own set of challenges as well. So it is always good to have regular family meetings, even catch ups, dinners, what have you, and just kind of help those teenagers feel like they are still a part of some sort of family unit. And that usually brings them back towards that parent that they've chosen to not live with. Obviously, if there's things about their safety or mental health or what have you, you've got to take those into account as well. We can't force them to live between two homes at a certain age, but we can encourage. And I always say it's still good to be the parent that encourages that contact with the other parent, whether it's, you know, dinners out or holidays or weekends, or, you know, even if they just stay one weekend a month with that parent, but the majority of the time with the other parent. So work out something that, you know, is, I think, manageable for the team, but fair and reasonable for both parents as well.
Yeah, and you sort of mentioned before, well, hey, some of these decisions are quite arbitrary when you're dealing with teenagers who maybe haven't got full brain development in that rational part of the brain, and let's find out what makes it so much more enjoyable at dad's, or what makes it more convenient at mum's, or what's going on there. What are the things? Because maybe actually there's some concerns that could be mitigated there, like by actually talking to the kids and without that emotional or blackmail kind of feeling of, oh, you make me feel so sad when, but more along the lines of, oh, hey, look, tell me more about what it's like when you're at dad's. What do you really love about being there? And actually making it okay for the kids to enjoy being at the
Mm,
other parent's place, but also gathering that very valuable information about,
mm,
hey, what are they going through? Maybe it's just that at this stage they are more aligned with mum.
mm,
Maybe
mm,
teenage girls going through girl stuff, they just want to be more with mum.
mm,
That doesn't last forever. So
mm,
just as you say, being
mm.
there, making sure they know that, they can come back if they want to.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Keeping
maintaining.
that door open and just you know, staying in touch with them and regularly organising catch ups if you're the parent that they're not living with. And you know, I've had some clients that term time they might stay with one parent, but in the holidays they go to the other parent, or for half the holidays they will go to the other parent and stay there. But teens tend to want to just, as we know, hide in their bedroom, never come out.
Mhm.
And so having two bedrooms to hide in doesn't really suit them. But maybe in the holidays they can, you know, share themselves between the two parents a little bit more.
Yeah,
Mm.
so I've got another question here. You mentioned mediation. What actually happens when you sign up for mediation?
So there's a couple of ways that you can look at mediation. You can do a private mediation and choose your own mediator that you're both happy with, and you can speak to, you can both have the opportunity to talk to that mediator to see if it feels like the right fit for you, or you can go through FDR mediation where it's subsidised by the government, and you pay half of those costs each, and you get assigned a mediator. You can pick a couple of mediators that you've been recommended and see if can be available for you through the FDR process. But generally, it is being assigned a mediator to work with both of you and work through, you know, if it's a co-parenting plan, and all the things that come with what their children need.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Okay. So, I had another question for you, actually, Kimberly, around those emotional stages that people typically go through, particularly in those early stages of separation. So it's all a bit fresh. We know this relationship's at an end, but can you speak a little bit about what you've seen typically with your clients in their emotional journey?
It's a bit like the stages of grief, really. You know, if you've been the one that has been blindsided or didn't choose to end the relationship, then you do go through a bit of a grief process where you go into that denial, the anger, the shock, the fear, the confusion, and then you start going into the stress continuum, and then hopefully at some point coming out the other side and accepting it and working through, you know, things in a more rational, amicable way. So it is a lot of emotions to deal with, and it depends on whether, you know, you were the initiator or not. But even as the initiator of ending a relationship, you've often already gone through that. before you've ended the relationship, right? But you're just a little bit ahead of your partner and where you're at in that continuum. But it is a lot of emotions to deal with, and some people can handle them on their own, and others need a little bit of guidance and support to get through that. And so I definitely, recommend that people speak to somebody to help unpack it and help work through it to be better at the other side.
Yeah, and don't compare yourself to others.
Mm,
Some people do go through those emotions, or maybe they've just had a really different experience, even if it looks the same on the outside. But we say that divorces are like snowflakes, right? They're all individual. So yeah, those cycles, they come and they go, and people should just remember that this is about you. It's about what you want for your family, and don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Don't worry about what anyone else is saying if it doesn't feel right to you. But sometimes that's where the confusion comes in. You get all this well-meaning advice, right? We've got
mm,
friends and family who love us, want to support us, protect us even. And we've sort of got to weigh that up with, oh, yeah, but maybe that person's only really heard the negative stuff. They don't know any of the positive stuff. There's a whole lot that goes into where you sit emotionally, right?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes time. It just takes time.
Now, this question I've got here comes back to something we were talking about earlier, actually. The question is, what do you say to the kids if your partner's leaving for someone else and the kids want to know why their relationship is over? Is it okay to tell them it's because of cheating?
My first reaction is no. They're going to probably figure it out at some point, but I just don't feel that it's up to you to be the one to, yeah, bring them into that mix. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess sometimes we've got to look at it, don't we? And again, ages and stages.
Mm,
How old are the children? Pointless telling a 4-year-old that there was cheating in the relationship, but obviously a teenager could have really strong emotions about
mm,
that.
mm,
And yeah, maybe that might make them angry with the other parent, and maybe that would feel good for a little bit. But
mm,
actually, for your family
mm,
unit, what's the outcome you want? The overall outcome we're working for?
mm, mm,
And I guess as well, the work that we do a lot of the time with clients is to how to answer the questions about why the relationship ended, telling the truth, being honest, but without any facts or details
mm,
that are not suitable for the
mm.
kids to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Mm,
So, Kimberly, if we were just going to sort of go down the route of, well, we're at a point where we've decided to separate. We've now got stuff, we've got a house and some money in some bank accounts, maybe a couple of vehicles. What do people need to know about relationship property, just on a really basic level?
Look, not everything's quite as clean cut, and sometimes it is good to have a chat with a lawyer about what that looks like in divvying up relationship property to understand for your own specific circumstances. If there's trust or businesses involved, it's a little bit more tricky. But if it's a simple, couple that have got a home, a couple of cars, some KiwiSaver, if it's really basic and easy like that, then it's a 50-50 split generally. You do have to start kind of gathering your assets and debt because that's all relationship property. So I always do recommend clients sit down with a bit of a spreadsheet and go through, what they own, what they owe, is there KiwiSaver involved? Is there student debt involved? Is there a business involved, and does that need to be valued? So there's a lot to think about, but a divorce coach or a family lawyer can help you start gathering the information you need to start looking at the big picture of splitting
Yeah.
assets. Yeah.
Yes, and once our resources page is up, we will have a budget template there, which of course, you might not need some of the items on that budget, or there might be some things that you need to add in and check your figures. But it's just a good starting point for people to see, hey, look, what are my expenses? What am I going to need per week if we're no longer sharing all these costs? And it is expensive to separate, isn't it?
We've been running two homes instead of one, so
Mhm.
there's two lots of everything in regards to bills. So it is a really good idea before you separate to actually, do the budget, do the figures, and see what is affordable, and it's not about staying together because you can't afford to separate, but it's about, okay, maybe we need to stay together for a little bit longer to start putting things in place so that it's financially we're more able to separate and both be still comfortable, or both be able to set up two homes, especially if you've got children. You both want to be able to home your children and have them in your care some of the time. So it's working out what these things cost and what we're going to come out the other end with so that we know what we can afford to do.
And what are some examples, without getting too far into the legal territory, but what are some examples of when it wouldn't be a 50-50 split financially?
If you've been the parent that stayed home potentially and looked after the children and kind of put your career on hold to bring up children, then it might not be a 50-50 split. If there has been a prenup or a contracting out agreement that's been drawn up prior to the relationship or at the beginning of the relationship, often, one party can come into a relationship with a lot more asset than the other. So a lot of people protect their share of what they bring into the relationship, and that means if the relationship comes to an end, then that contracting out agreement comes into play, and they get to take away from the asset pool what they brought in. So there's a few different scenarios there.
Yeah, okay. And so, if it does come to the point where, in fact, you've decided, yep, we know how we want to split our assets and our debts in a way that seems fair to us, what's the next step then?
The next step, if you've managed to kind of work through that yourself, which would be the ideal, right? To not kind of overly involve lawyers in those early phases and have some really good conversations with each other about what do we own, what do we owe, and how are we going to divvy these up. Then put it in writing, put it in a document that you're both happy and agree on, and then individually go and take that to a lawyer and get some independent advice on what that looks like. And if the lawyer's also as happy as you both are about that, then they'll just draft it into a legal document so that you've got a settlement agreement in play. It's all been overseen by both your lawyers, and then from that you've also got a date of separation, so that 2 years post that date, you know when you can apply for the dissolution of marriage and get your divorce.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, we've got about 8 minutes to go. I've got a couple more questions in the chat, and then I've got another question for you, but we'll deal with the ones
Love
in the
it.
chat first.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, next question. Oh, actually, well, that's timely. What happens if you can't agree on how to split up assets and you go to court?
Well, obviously, that's the last place you'd want to go. So we would hope that you've tried every other avenue before you end up in court. And so, obviously, if you've both engaged a lawyer and you still can't come to an agreement, a lot of my clients have from there tried to do some mediation. And so, whether it's private mediation or FDR mediation, and see if a mediator can, help you both see each other's points of view and help you kind of come to a win-win situation rather than a win-lose situation. And then if mediation works, then you can take that document back to your lawyers and have it notarized. Obviously, if mediation doesn't work, then it is a matter of going to court, and you can represent yourself in court. But if you're not a well-trained family lawyer, it might be quite challenging for many New Zealanders to do that. So it would mean, engaging a family lawyer to support you through that process.
Mhm. Okay. And another question here, what happens to your KiwiSaver after
Mm,
separation?
okay. So KiwiSaver, it is considered relationship property. So whatever you've both put away in KiwiSaver during the relationship is considered relationship property, which is a 50-50 split. So generally I say to clients, print off your KiwiSaver statements and from when you started the relationship to the date you agreed that you ended the relationship, whatever you've put away in that time is considered a 50-50 split. Often one party's got more in their KiwiSaver than the other. And so we can balance that out and look at, okay, well, if your partner's got $100,000 that he's put away, or in the time you've been together and you've only got $50,000 that you've put away, then we split the difference, which is 25,000. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to draw down your KiwiSaver. A lot of people don't like to touch their KiwiSaver unless they really have to. But that person that's owed the 25,000, for an example, would maybe take that extra lump sum out of the sale of the family home or the split of assets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course there are a lot of variables, anything to do with relationship property. They usually are legal questions, aren't they? That's when we go to our trusted family lawyer to get the information. And so this is very, very general.
Mm,
Once you apply people's particular situations, well, the facts may change or the agreements may differ. So it's
mm,
part of the
mm,
reason why people need to just sort of focus on what they are doing rather than listening to what their neighbour got or how their sister's divorce went, because things might be different.
Every case is a little bit different, and what you want as well. You guys get to make your own decisions. The law says one thing, but you guys might want to do it a little bit differently. If one
Yeah,
party wants to be more generous to the other, then who's to say you can't be, you know? So
yeah.
there's lots of different ways that you can look at it.
And of course, that's one of the reasons that we hope that our clients don't end up in court, because by that stage, we've now taken the decision-making power out of the client's hands and we've given it over to a judge who, you know what, they might be amazing, very good at their job, but they don't know you, they don't know
Mm,
your family. And at the end of the day, they're not going to see you again in all likelihood, but you will be living with these really big decisions around your financial future and maybe even the care of your children. So,
mm,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
we do like to see clients avoid that process if we can,
Mm.
as necessary as it might be sometimes. Well, so the last thing I wanted to ask you, Kimberly, just in the last couple of minutes that we've got, is whether you could share a success story, obviously without breaking any confidentiality, naming any names, but a client who navigated their divorce with your help.
Look, I mean, I've been a divorce coach for nearing on 10 years. So I've seen many success stories. I think as a general, what I consider a success story is when two parties can come together and communicate well about the separation to start with, and then how they're going to separate assets, and if they can do a lot of that work themselves and do that groundwork together, as well as if there's children involved, like what will that look like? What do we need to consider for our children and for our co-parenting situation? That's my idea of success, when they can communicate all of these needs before engaging a lawyer, or in between speaking to lawyers. You always are going to need a little bit of legal assistance and advice, but if you guys can work through this together in the best interest of not only yourselves but your children, then that to me is a success story. And then the success shows once you've gone your separate ways, set up in two homes, co-parenting amicably, communicating the children's needs constantly, turning up to sports events together, having birthdays for your children together. To me, that is a successful divorce.
Yeah, yeah. And of course it's not always possible, but the main thing, as you say, is keep the kids safe. It's not the divorce that hurts the children, it's the conflict
Hmm.
in the divorce that hurts the children. So,
Hmm.
yeah, always bringing it back to the needs of the kids. And
Mm.
generally speaking, that's what both parents want, right? So
Yeah,
if that's the only thing that they can agree on, they usually agree on that.
it's true. And sometimes they can't see that to start with, but it's that reminder that, you know, a lot of clients will say to me, I'm mostly worried about how the children are going to fare through this, how is it going to affect the children? And as you've just said, Nikki, it affects the children if they are constantly seeing conflicting parents who don't get on, who can't talk about their children's needs together and show up and be there for their children. That is what affects the children.
Yeah, yeah. And that's pretty much our why, isn't it? Why do we do this work? Why do we work with individuals going through this process? It's to work towards better outcomes for Kiwis and their families. And of course, separation and divorce doesn't just affect you guys as a couple or even you as a family. It's the wider family. Sometimes
Mm,
people at work or your activities outside of the home. Relationships get strained, life
mm,
can get pretty tough, And we just
Mm,
like to know that there is support out there, right? There are people that can help you through this and give you some guidance around how to improve those relationships and how to manage your own emotions and move through this really challenging time
mm.
to a future that you can actually look forward to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like it's so that you can thrive post-divorce,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be the end of everything. It's the end of a relationship, but it's the beginning of new things to come. And working with somebody like a divorce coach is going to help you focus on your future, what you need to, thrive and be the best person you can be or parent you can be moving forward on your own. So having that support is I think paramount to the next stages of your life.
Yeah, well, speaking of endings, that's actually the end of our time today. So, thank you to the people that have joined us today. We will be running 2 other webinars with different topics in the next couple of weeks, and then we will continue on not once a week, but with some more structure, and that information you'll be able to find on our website as well. So, as Kimberly said earlier, if you would like to get in touch with us, if you've got questions that have come up from today, or you just need some of those resources a bit earlier, please just hop onto the website, use the contact form, and we'll get back to you and see what we can do to help you in the short term.
We're
Yeah.
here to help no matter what. So, and we've got coaches throughout the country, so it doesn't matter where you are in New Zealand, there's always somebody that can support you either in person or on Zoom, and we can point you in the right direction for other things if needed.
Yeah. All
So
right.
thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you all again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.